This week we're going to be looking at premium golf balls. We're going to start testing with the #1 on tour, the #1 branded ball, #1 used ball out there with the Pro V1. And then 3 lesser known, lesser used balls that do cost less, but give a comparison on what you can expect from this and these, and whether they're really that much better value, or does the Pro V1 still come out on top. So, premium golf balls, what does that really mean? There are two types, there's sort of distance ball and there's premium. So the premium balls, of which all these are the same, the construction that makes them so, it's a multi-layer construction. So you're looking at a core that's designed to be hit a little harder than the distance balls. So it's designed to optimize its performance with a drive at the higher swing speed. So essentially you've got a higher compression core, which resists loading as much as possible. But what that does mean is that when you do hit it hard, it then activates the core and then creates the strongest spin profile in the driver. So actually, for the higher swing speeds, these balls will come off faster and spin less and be more efficient than a distance ball because of the core construction. They also, these are all 3-piece, you get the odd 4-piece construction, but these 3-piece balls then have a mantle layer. What that means, you've got the center core and there's a layer around it, almost a membrane around it, which is really quite rigid. So again, this is about retaining form and shape and recovering as fast as possible. The faster it recovers, the more stable the ball, the less energy lost through deformation and sound and heat. But the quicker it recovers, the more stable the ball flight, the more consistent the spin profile, and the better the distance. And then all 4 of these balls have a cast urethane cover. And the key thing with that is urethane is a stretchy material. So what it has that a distance ball doesn't have is that softness to the cover. What that does is, particularly at low speeds with the wedges and the short irons, is that as the grooves, as the golf club hits the ball, it actually stretches slightly. So that actually allows the edge of the groove to get into the cover, which then pulls the ball down, creates effectively more grip, but that creates more spin. So you get a lower launch and a higher spin, so spin control on the wedges. So ultimately what they're trying to do is optimize top end performance and distance and ball speed and low spin at high speeds, at sort of the players end, pro end speeds, but then maximize control around the greens as well. So trying to get the best of all worlds when it comes to the more elite golfer who's not hitting offline as much. You go to the distance ball, if your swing's offline, if you create lots of shot shape, you don't want the cover to grip as much because we want it to go straight. So all these balls are designed to optimize ball speed and low spin with a driver at high speed, and then maximize spin control with the short irons and wedges due to the cover material and the core construction as well. So how do they differ? Well, the answer is not an awful lot, but let's run through them. So we've got the Pro V1. Titleist Pro V1 is the fact that it doesn't need the word Titleist in front of it and that everyone knows what ball you mean. That is an incredibly powerful piece of branding. The fact that you don't need the manufacturer's name, and it's even when we're looking at this category of golf ball, players still refer to it as a Pro V1 style ball. Now, the truth of the matter is that Titleist got there first with this construction. The Pro V1 was the first generation of the forerunner to all of these golf balls from a construction point of view. Because of that core material and the cover material giving speed and spin, but not having to suffer and lose one versus the other, it was a standout ball when it launched back around 2000. But this iteration of the Pro V1 is designed really kind of the long game side of things, so a bit of a lower launching, lower spinning ball. But this iteration is designed to give a little bit more height and a little bit more stopping power than with the irons and wedges than previous models, so not knocking flight down too much. But again, the claims are going to be penetrating ball flight, consistent ball flight, and stopping power around the greens. That's the market leader overall. We now move on to Vice. Now, Vice has been around since 2012. It's a German product, or is originated in Germany, and it's a direct consumer model. So again, we have that construction, which is, to all intents and purposes, very, very similar to the Pro V1. We've got that core that's designed to retain energy and to optimize that spin and ball speed at high speeds. We've got that mantle there. Now, where there is a bit of a difference, Titleist has 388 dimples on that Pro V1. This has 318. So that does affect aerodynamics. It does affect percentage of cover of dimples. And by that, I mean how much of the ball is taken up by those dimples. All those areas in between, The Vice has a little bit more of that, where it's effectively a flat surface, and that does affect aerodynamics. And the argument would be more dimples, there's less flat surfaces, therefore the airflow, the aerodynamics are a little bit more stable, and that would certainly be one of the claims that Titleist has. The Vice 318, so it's 60, 70 dimples less than the Titleist, which is quite considerable. So could be quite noticeable in what that does to ball flight, but it's going to be downrange. These are the bits we can't test today, but it's the downrange flight consistency that is also going to affect. But designed for low spin for longer distance at the top end, but soft feel and optimized spin in the wedges. So again, trying to gain spin with the wedges, but give a lower spin for the long game control. Now we move to Seed. So Seed was formed in Ireland, and this was formed in Ireland in 2015. So Seed was actually taken from the name that an Australian slang term for golf ball, which was called a seed, and that's sort of essentially kind of the branding that they wanted for the company. Was kind of a little bit of a less formal one. But again, we've got 318 dimples on this one as well. So that, again, that noticeably less than the Titleist. And again, direct to consumer. This is where you may or may not have heard of these golf balls because you're not going to see them in shops at your local golf course, but you can get these online and sent direct to you. Construction-wise, we're talking very small differences between them, and it's really going to be oriented to how they want the feel of the golf ball, the face, the softness, the hardness. So the cover materials are basically the same material, but things down to the paint will make differences to, excuse me, the paint will make differences to the sound and the feel, but the look of the golf ball as well. And then the dimple patterns for that dimple coverage, that's going to affect aerodynamics downrange as well, if not necessarily the spin measurements we get directly off the club face in the bay. And then finally, Maxfli. Now, Maxfli have been around since 1910, so they've been around a hugely long time, been owned by Dunlop, and then they were taken up by TaylorMade. The copyrights linked to Sumitomo Rubber that owns Strixon, currently owned by Dick's Sporting Goods in the US. And so as a brand that's gone through a few iterations, really kind of historically, really highly regarded for golf balls. And this is essentially kind of they're coming back into the golf ball market. Ben Griffin won with a Maxfli golf ball recently on US PGA Tour. So the quality of the golf ball, the history is there, the backup of the design principles that they've always had, that's always been there. But ultimately, for this the premium construction we're seeing now, there does seem that backup of tour validation. But again, designed for that kind of, this particular model designed for that lower mid flight, stronger ball speed off the long game, but higher spin around the greens. So we've got two very well established brands and two newer brands. How do they compare down the bay? So first up, Pro V1, and say ball we're all really familiar with, used massively out on tour. Let's start with driver. So it's a very crisp, solid feel off the face. When I say crisp, it's got that kind of a little bit of a pop as it comes off the club face. It's funny, the different notes, the different sounds really do affect feel and affect how we perceive the ball coming off the club face. But it's something that I wouldn't say is necessarily heavy feel to the hit, but to say solid but quite a lively sound. Yeah, there's that bit of a higher pitched note to that. You kind of feel energized coming off the club face. Yeah, something that they really focus in on when they're developing the balls out. But yeah, really feels like there's a bit of pop there. So now into the Vice Pro. Interesting, a slightly different. It's when you've got them side by side, slightly different visual. It's a slightly less bright color to the ball. But this is a direct to consumer brand, so interesting to see the difference in feel off the face here. So similar sound. It's a little bit more of it's a slightly firmer feel to hit with. I think the Pro V1, they've certainly majored on the softer feel, but this one definitely, it feels like there's a little bit more ball face, it might sound odd to say, a little more ball face contact. It feels just a slightly harder core coming off the club face. A little bit of a heavier strike. Yeah, it's almost like you can feel the ball on the club face a little bit more rather than the Pro V's just sort of gone. So certainly the Vice Pro feels like it's not heavier, it feels it a little bit. So now Seed, the Pro 1 it's called. Interesting enough, looking at it, dimple pattern's almost a little bit more even, you know, in terms of more kind of grid-like, which is funny when you're so really focusing on the detail, haven't really noticed before. Definitely a little bit more of a muted note. That's definitely slightly duller tone, less high-pitched note to the previous two, which probably does make it feel a little less fast. Not that that is the case. I don't believe from a ball speed point of view we're going to see much difference, but it's definitely a much more muted tone off the club face. Yeah, a little bit of a, let's say, duller, muted, whichever you want to pick it. You know, it's less of a high-pitched note. So maybe for somebody who wants to feel like it's a hot golf ball off the club face, this may not give you quite as much of that. So Maxfli, a ball that actually a brand that's been around a heck of a long time. Back to that brighter color that we saw on the Pro V1 actually, in terms of the brightness of the whiteness of the ball. So you're visually more similar there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's halfway between the Pro V Vice and the Seed. It's maybe not quite as lively a sound, but has that feeling, it feels like it pops off the club face a little bit more. It's again back to that slightly lighter feel off the club face, almost like it's kind of off the face a little bit faster. And so this is very much feel rather than reality. The data we'll check in a moment. But I'm going to hit 2 or 3 more with this and get a good batch of data. Then we'll compare the numbers. But overall, yeah, back to a more lively feel. So across the drivers, we had a little bit of talk about the feel, but actually what did they do ball speed wise? Now they're all claiming faster core for more ball speed, and they're going to claim low spin for long distance. You know, why wouldn't you claim that from a premium golf ball? But where do they really sit relative to one another? Well, looking across that 4 batches of data, slight variation in club speed there. Ball speed wise, they're all in a good window. We're not going to see any golf ball come out poorly on this, because they're just not going to sell any if they don't come out fast off the club face. So we're looking at maybe half a mile an hour proportionally between them all, probably not even a mile an hour. There's a human error in strike there, which is going to affect it slightly, but they're broadly speaking all 148, 149 efficiency. That's not the golf ball that's creating those variances. Where we do see a slight variance is in launch and spin. So actually between the Maxfli, the Seed and the Vice Pro, launch angles are less than half a degree difference. The Seed being the lowest spin of those 3. So that one is sort of notably, it stands out as being that little bit less spin on average. 100 revolutions, just over 100 revolutions less than the Maxfli, and then a couple of hundred or so up to the Vice Pro. But they're all at 13.5 launch and basically around the 2000 spin. And you know, angle of attack for those 3, you know, the same. So the launch characteristics from a swing point of view, very consistent. And therefore distances, you know, the highest launching the Maxfli Tour carried a couple of yards further, but we're kind of splitting hairs really in that respect. The Pro V1 was noticeably a little bit lower launch, so you can see there 12.9 in terms of launch angle here versus 13.5 to 13.75. So it is half to 3/4 of a degree lower launch for this batch of data for me in this series, and is by 2 RPM, the lowest spin of any of the balls as well. So proportionally, the Seed is lower spin to launch angle, but flight-wise, the Pro V1's that little bit flatter overall. So, you know, marginally more closed face by a degree, that's going to affect it slightly. So, you know, maybe that drags it back up a fraction, but for this batch of tests, it's the lowest flight. The bit that between them stands out, and this is, you know, one of the Titleist claims will be consistency. That's really where they stand out. That is what we're seeing here. You know, tolerance on spin, 167 revs. Now that is 70 better than the next best. You know, it's 130 from the Vice Pro, and it's, you know, almost twice as consistent, or half as much variability as the Seed. So, you know, the Pro V1, then the Maxfli, then the Vice Pro, then the Seed in terms of that window on spin variation, that sits head and shoulders above the others. So if it's consistency you're looking for and a bit of a flatter launch angle, that ProV1's doing a really good job. But fair play to all of them, driver-wise, they're all really strong. So completed the driver data. Let's move into the 6-iron, hit a few with each ball. Again, the comment on feel, and then we'll check the data out. So again, starting with ProV1. So yeah, we know this to be kind of on the stronger side in terms of flight, certainly within their range, it's the lowest launching. Again, very solid feel. It's a bit like the driver. There's a bit of life there, a bit of a click off the face, but it's got a bit of guts to it on an iron. It's not that kind of harsh, hard, clicky sound that the ProV1X gives. I prefer the more toned down feel of this between the two balls. I find the X a little hard. This doesn't have that harshness. They have engineered it to be softer, and that certainly lives up to that feel. It's still, it's a firm core, so it's still proportionate. It's still a fairly solid feel, but it's not a hard sound off the face. Yeah, and there's a little bit of pop, just that little bit of extra fizz off the club face. It feels like it's giving you something back. So again, kind of like the driver, it's sort of a lighter feel. You know there's a solid golf ball on the bottom end of there, but it feels like it comes off the face with a bit of fizz rather than being a kind of a heavy hit. Nice sound. I think for a premium ball, the ProV's done a really good job at keeping it that softer side. So again, switch into the Vice Pro. That's our next ball here. So yeah, be interesting to see that comparison. Obviously, ProV1's a ball I use, so I'm very familiar with that feel. So switching into the Vice. Oh, that's a noticeably softer feel. Whereas the ProV had that feel of a bit of pop off the club face. That feels, okay, I'm not going to call it Bellata-like, because it definitely isn't, but that's a much softer feel from the iron head there. Almost like the kind of the way I would describe it would almost be like the mantle there, the outer side of the core. Doesn't feel like it gives as much resistance, whereas you get that bit of a pop back out of the ProV1. So for someone looking for a soft feel off the club face, that Vice Pro, that's very impressive. Yeah, so you could go so far as to say, is it a bit of a duller feeler as a result? Yes, and we'll come on to this, but interesting, just seeing the data there, an interesting spin number out of that. But yeah, if you're looking for the softest feeling ball out of the batch that I'm testing here, I'd be surprised if we beat that. So now to the seed again. This one had that sort of slightly heavier feel off the club face with the driver. So let's see with an iron where we're at. It's still actually a little bit softer than the ProV1 from a feel point of view, but it's not as, dare I say it, duller sound as the Vice. So it's still quite a soft feedback off the club face, definitely. But there's a little bit more give back, there's a little bit more liveliness. There's almost again a slightly lighter feel, whereas the Vice definitely had that very, almost say, dull, softened down, muted note. This has just a little bit more pop back. Yeah, definitely a little bit more feedback. Quite interesting going to that comparison coming out of the Vice, which was noticeably softer. This has a bit more to it. It almost feels like it, for someone wanting to feel a bit of speed, the slightly firmer balls do actually feel like they pop off the face just a little bit more. And so now into the Maxfli Tour. So having had two very soft feeling balls just then, where does this one sit? It's much more ProV1-like, and that little bit of a firmer feel. So it almost feels like the casing. I think this is the way I'd describe both the Titleist and the Maxfli. The casing feels just a little bit more resistant. So it almost like the kind of the outside of the ball feels a little bit firmer. So it's just resisting loading and squashing. This is a feel rather than a fact, by the way. It just feels like it's resisting loading a little bit more, hence that feeling of it coming off the face a little bit faster. And that little bit of a sort of higher pitch, a little bit of a kind of a, so it's a bit more of a click to the strike. So yeah, so feels just a little, just feels like it gives you a bit more speed. So the numbers will tell us what it actually does, but feedback wise, the Maxfli and the Titleist definitely give that sensation of a little bit more ball speed off the face. So into 6 irons, so this is where the focus changes a little bit from the ball manufacturer saying this is the longest ball we've ever made to actually then the claims about softness and spin control come into it. So, you know, Titleist again talk about flight consistency, but that they've improved the kind of drop and stop control. And actually within the 4 balls tested, the Titleist had the slightly higher launch. So you spin marginally on the higher side as well. We're talking about, you know, 100 revs more than the next highest, but well, not about, half a degree higher launch angle. So, you know, considering an angle of attack's a 0.2 of a degree, 0.3 of a degree top to bottom, you know, face angles within a half a degree, it's noticeably launching a little bit higher. So does that help with stopping power? Absolutely. Is it a high spin ball? No. It is their lower spin ball. You take kind of left dashes, maybe a little bit lower spin again, but it's their lower launching and spinning ball of the range. And, you know, relative to these 4 balls, it's actually the highest flighted and spinning of any of them, which is kind of quite interesting. But that does back up the claim about softer landing, you know, improved drop and stop control would be the terminology Titleist would use. That is, relatively speaking to the other balls, backed up. You know, again, spin consistency, 131 revs versus 186, 173, 185. So none of them are bad, but the Titleist, again, we are looking at small margins, you know, 25% tighter in terms of that spin variation. So again, a little bit more consistency of flight. So again, that's that check mark based on the claim of consistency. You still get that out of the Pro V1 a little bit better than the other models. Moving through the Vice Pro being that kind of softer feel ball, the spin was noticeably, having hit the Pro V1, was noticeably that little bit lower, and that was why I remarked in the piece to camera earlier on, is that that's taken 300 revs of spin off. It's not vast, but that's the difference between a Pro V1 and a Pro VX from most of the testing we've done. So that takes that launch and spin down a little bit more. So if you're looking to bring that flight down, of all of these balls, the Vice Pro is the lowest launch and the lowest spinning. You know, ball speed good, you know, again, really soft feel. Spin variation is just by one RPM, just the highest of them as well. So again, none of them are bad, but that is the highest variation on spin, but the softest feel. Again, seed, very, very similar in terms of feedback, very same launch angle, spin 80 revs higher, still on that lower side on spin. And so we've got to take the Pro V as a kind of base marker, because that is the one that there's the most data of out there and which most people have played. They're all coming in a little bit of a flatter, stronger flight. So you're not getting quite as much stopping power in the mid irons with this as the Pro V1. But again, all around, you're second best on spin consistency, all around good golf ball, but again, on that softer side, feel-wise. And then into the Maxfli Tour, spins back up 100 or so revs, so we're only 100 down on the Pro V1 here. Much more of that kind of mid-flight. You know, interesting, the 2 with the most similar feel, the firmer feels, both have the higher spin. So there's going to be something from a construction point of view, you get a little less squash potentially on the face, and that actually helps to retain a little bit more spin, potentially just using the cover a little bit more. But you know, slightly higher spin, not high, but a little higher than Pro V1. On the higher side for spin dispersion, but again, not bad. All good balls, but really quite distinct differences in feel with the irons, which you don't get with the driver quite so much. So starting back into the Pro V1 with the wedges, and this is where I'm really looking to feel that ball kind of fizz up the face, looking to feel the whole face working against the cover of the ball. So again, that lower launch, higher spin, that shows me that it's gripping the face and getting lots of spin control. So again, Pro V1 there, it's still, they're all going to feel fairly soft when it gets to this end, but you're quite a responsive feel off the club face. Just definitely feels like you're getting into the cover a little bit. I want to really feel it kind of zip up the face. And that definitely gives me that sensation that I'm using quite a lot of the face. It's coming out nice and strong in terms of launch angle, but if it's coming out low, as long as I haven't thinned it, then that means you're getting lots of face grip. We should be getting good spin as well, but again, for me, very familiar because I use it, but you can definitely feel like you're getting some cover on the face and some good grip. So back into the Vice, this was the softest feeling of the balls on the irons. So into the wedge, how does this compare? Interesting, so really quite different. definitely a kind of more, I would describe it, slightly more hollow feel to the strike. Launched a little bit higher, not high, but launched a bit higher, but definitely had a deader feel. It's a hard one to describe, almost a slightly, in comparison, a slightly clunky feel to the Titleist. I go back to one of the wording I used earlier, so a slightly heavier feel on the club face. So less like I'm getting lots of grip on the cover and more just the ball's kind of clunking off the club face a little bit. I think if I do one more here, see if I can get into the back of the ball a little bit. Better feel, but that's still noticeably a higher launch we're getting with the Titleist. You know, none of these are going to feel hard, but I would say there's a little bit of a duller feel off the club face. As I say, a slightly heavier sound and feel. Maybe just feels like I'm not getting quite, it doesn't feel like I'm getting quite as much purchase. So again, see softer feel coming off the irons. We had that real difference in feel to the vise. And how does this one then stack up? Not dissimilar again. I think if anything, maybe a little bit more sensation of grip. I felt like I got a little bit more purchase on that. Had a slightly, again, lighter feel. I would say, yeah, and some would view this as a positive. It has a less lively feel to it. The Titleist felt like it had a bit more of a, like it just came off the face with a little bit more life to it. Now, feel is subjective, so someone else's feedback and terminology would be different than mine. It's a bit like when you get someone tasting wine. Some person smells and tastes one thing, another person tastes another. So we're all going to feel these a little, maybe describe them slightly differently. But yeah, these two, where they felt softer off the irons, always feel, the harsh description is lifeless in comparison. But some players might like that, and it doesn't feel like it's coming off hot, doesn't feel like it's going to get away from you. But doesn't necessarily feel like I'm getting as much cover grip. A little bit better maybe, but that's just a very different sensation to strike to with those two balls versus the original Titleist. Finally back into the Maxfli. So again, one of the firmer feeling balls with irons. Very different sound. That's a higher pitch note, even more so than the Pro V1. That has, again, that bit of pop back off the club face, but a noticeably different sound. You know, a bit of a higher launch as well, but a very, very different feedback. So interesting to see with one more, see if I can get into this a bit and bring that flight down a little bit. Yeah, it's less of a heavy feel than the last two, but that's notably, seeing where that's hitting the screen, that's a noticeably higher flight. So be interesting to see the data, and I'm going to hit a couple more, then we'll go over the wedge comparisons, but how the feel with the wedges and the data, how they compare. I've had a snapshot of a look, but I haven't really looked at every single shot so far. So we'll get a couple more of this, running through the wedges, then give an overall summary. So across the board in wedges, actually some slightly more noticeable differences here, and it's actually at the lower speeds we see a bit more of a separation between the balls. So looking at the Titleist first down on the bottom here, it is the lowest launch angle. So top to bottom there's over a degree of difference, which is actually quite a lot considering angle of attack wise they're all within 0.1 of a degree. So it's the ball and its reaction with the face which is making that difference. So at 25.6, it's just under half a degree less than the next best one if you're looking for low launch. But it is also the lowest spin. Now, it is the most consistent on spin again, but if you're not looking for a ball that overspins coming into the green, this is definitely the route to go. It's something that I've certainly noticed playing with it, is in pitch shots. Is it actually getting as much spin, maybe as much spin as I want out of it, but it's not overspinning coming into greens as well. So certainly for a lower launch and a lower spin, the Titleist is definitely the best one there. If we go to the other extreme, highest launch for the Vice Pro, 26.8, it's a degree and 1.2 degrees higher, and so spin gets up as well. So that and the Seed, very, very similar. They're the two softer feeling balls, and the trend there is the softer feeling have actually picked the launch angle up that little bit more. Spin within 1 RPM between the two of them, but it's boastful to see a 247 rev variation tolerance with the Titleist. We're at 333 and 436 with the Vice and the Seed respectively. So both still good for spin, and they're not bad numbers. It's not the difference between one stopping and one running on, that tolerance, but it is that little bit higher in terms of the variation you're going to see. But it's innate to be a little bit of a higher ball flight. So if you like to see the ball get up a little bit more with wedges, they're definitely good options. And then moving on to the Maxfli Tour, best for spin. Now, interesting, I felt like it hit the net a bit higher in the bay, but actually back down a little bit in launch angle versus the Seed and the Vice Pro, but up on spin. So what we're seeing there is spin relative to launch angle. If you're looking for the highest spinning ball relative to flight of these ones, the Maxfli Tour comes out right on top. So as we saw from the data, there really isn't an awful lot to mark these balls out from one another. They're all, as we said, premium construction, good quality golf balls, but there are some marginal differences between them. Now, if we're going to take the key performance markers, let's run through them briefly. Driver-wise, maximum distance was the Maxfli, 0.4 of a yard from the Pro V1, from the Seed, but that was still just the longest, had slightly higher launch with that low spin, which just gave it a hair more flight efficiency. If we're talking about low spin, that was the Pro V1. This is with driver. So Pro V1 had just a couple of RPMs less, but technically the Pro V1 was the lowest spin and the lowest launching golf ball. Moving into mid irons, best for stopping power. Now, if we're looking at, generally speaking, kind of height and land angles, Pro V1. If we're looking at land angle wise, the Pro V1 had a 46-degree land angle. Then the Maxfli was 45.7, the Seed was 45.1, and the Vice was 44.6. So there's a notable bit of difference there, with the Vice coming out noticeably that bit flatter than the others. Wedge spin, forgive me for checking my notes, make sure I get these readings right. If we're looking at spin rate alone, there's a Maxfli at 9,229, but that had a land angle of 41.5. We then moved to the Vice Pro 9,147 that had a land angle of 43.3, which is actually the highest of any of the land angles because of the launch angle. We then go to the Seed ball at 9,146 that had a land angle of 43.1, again nearly as high as the Vice with a higher launch angle, but then the Pro V1 was the lowest land angle, lowest spin at 8,926 with a land angle of 41.3. So definitely some differences in terms of spin and launch angle depending on how you want to dial in your wedges. But if we're looking at consistency, and by this is really kind of adding together all the tolerance numbers, the Pro V1 is a standout winner here. So if we just add together those tolerance on spin numbers, the cumulative total, the Pro V1 is 545. Next on 815, Vice Pro. 822 was the Maxfli, 921 was the Seed. So you can see there's a real clear standout for consistency of spin from the Pro V1. Could be those extra dimples that we got from it, but certainly that is where Titleist really claim that consistency claim absolutely stacks up. And it's from a softest feel point of view, then we're going to go with the Vice or the Seed. Now that's affected some of the flight characteristics of some of the short game shots, a little bit of a higher launch in the wedges, but from a pure softness, those two stand out that little bit more. So there is a little bit of something for everyone with all these golf balls. And the other bit that we can't forget is cost. Titleist is going to cost you around £50 per dozen. The Vice and the Seed around £35 per dozen. Maxfli currently not available directly in the UK, but being kind of US owned, they are $40 per dozen. So if we're looking in pounds sterling, it's going to be around the 32 to 35 pound mark. So there is actually a significant saving. If you get through golf balls in the year, you're going to save a significant amount of money with one of these three golf balls versus a Pro V1. Does that extra bit of consistency make it that bit better value? That's in the eye of the beholder and the eye of the player. But all four very good. And if we're looking a little bit at wear and tear, probably the Maxfli with that softer, higher spin with the wedges, there was a little bit more wear on the cover of those. The other three, pretty good durability. So ultimately, there are arguments across the board for each ball type, but The other bit that one must do is if you kind of decide you want to try a different golf ball, chip and putt with them as well. Ball flight's one thing, but your touch and feel around the greens is a major marker to how consistent your distance control is putting. So if there's a particular flight that one ball suits and feel that one ball suits for your long game, make sure it matches the short game, and you never know, you might score better as well as save some money in the long run if you switch out of a Pro V1 or the premium kind of top end branded balls into something just a little bit less dear.